You're listening to On Shifting Ground from World Affairs and KQED. I'm Ray Suarez. In 2020, Sheila Paylan got on a plane and flew to a country at war. It was the end of the year, and the lawyer felt called to Armenia to help, however she could.
It didn't start off as a choice to move to Armenia. I came to Armenia soon after the end of the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War to lend a hand because I'm skilled in war crimes investigations and international accountability, and I saw that there was a real need for that sort of thing.
The Canadian-born human rights attorney had served on the Rwandan Genocide Tribunal and the ex-Yugoslavia War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague. In 2020, Paylan was in Phnom Penh, focused on the crimes of the Khmer Rouge when war broke out between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh, an Armenian enclave which had long fought for independence.
So I booked a flight to come for a month, and I basically never left. So soon after that, I realized, okay, a month is not long enough. And then it turned to 3 and 6. And I did leave a couple of times to go back to my past life. You know, I went back to Congo, I went back to Cambodia to do this sort of work there. And each time I thought, why would I be doing this there when I need to be doing this here? So this is home now.
Paylan's connection to her work in Armenia is personal. She's a descendant of Armenian genocide survivors on both sides.
I spent 15 years working on other people's conflicts. And when I saw that there was such a lack of effort on the international community's part, I couldn't justify going back.
And there's been a lot of work for a human rights lawyer to do. In December 2022, Azerbaijan laid siege to the Armenian enclave, cutting off the region's 100,000 Armenian inhabitants from food, medicine, and fuel.
The ICJ issued an order to lift the blockade. Azerbaijan did not abide by that, and there was nothing anyone could do.
This blockade reached a tipping point in late September when Azerbaijan launched a massive offensive against the region, shelling homes and military bases. The goal was to force the dissolution of the government in Stepanakert, the capital, and it succeeded. In less than 24 hours, the self-proclaimed Republic of 35 years capitulated. Over the next 5 days, Nagorno-Karabakh's entire population fled into neighboring Armenia, creating a humanitarian crisis. Then, in early October, Armenia ratified the Rome Statute, meaning the country can officially join the International Criminal Court. Sheila's been a part of the movement to make this happen.
Joining the International Criminal Court for Armenia gives it now, for the first time, a viable avenue to seek accountability for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. This was not possible before. It's also significant because it's a major act of sovereignty on Armenia's part. It shows the world that Armenia is like-minded with a certain group of states, which is peace-loving, accountability-oriented, part of the international legal order, the rules-based order. We don't believe that committing war crimes is a good thing. We don't believe that being aggressive is a good thing. We are going to work against that.
But what does that decision mean for Armenia's already strained relations with Russia? And how will this help the nation address what it says are the war crimes and ethnic cleansing by Azerbaijan? Human rights lawyer Sheila Paylan joins us from Yerevan. Welcome to On Shifting Ground.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, recent reports from Stepanakert, the main city of Nagorno-Karabakh, say the city is basically deserted. There are possessions scattered across the streets and sidewalks, a sign that a very large number of people left in a very large hurry. Is that it? Is this over? Did Azerbaijan win?
Well, there's definitely a sense of that in Armenia, a sense of despair and despondency. But they only win if there's no eventual accountability for what they've done. So they bombed on September 19th. They started bombing Nagorno-Karabakh to take it back by force. And within 24 hours, the authorities of Nagorno-Karabakh surrendered and the mass exodus started. The context in which this takes place, and over a period of about 5 days, over 100,000 Armenians leaving in such a haste, amounts to an international crime. It's a forcible displacement that I would qualify as a crime against humanity. There really is a need for accountability for something of this nature. So, time will tell. Most mass crimes of this kind take a long time before seeing a day in court. Armenia joined the International Criminal Court, so hopefully we'll see some way of holding them to account so that they don't get away with this.
For their part, the Azeris say there was no need for the exodus, that the people of Nagorno-Karabakh were welcome to stay in Azerbaijan and be citizens of a joint state, that they didn't force those people to leave. How do you respond to that?
The forcible and coercive environment in which they're saying that now after the fact, I mean, after starving a population for 9 months, after decades of state-sponsored hatred being pumped through the people of Azerbaijan, people have been trained and taught to hate Armenians. If Azerbaijan considers them its own citizens, they are the most despised minority. We saw similar situations in the context of the former Yugoslavia, where anti-Croatian sentiment or anti-Bosnian sentiment by Serbs led people to flee their villages and homes because they were so scared to stay. And international courts have found those instances to constitute forcible deportation or forcible displacement. So you don't have to hold a gun to anyone's head. You just have to create an environment where it makes them impossible to stay, and that legally constitutes, it gives the elements for there to be a qualification as deportation or a forcible displacement.
Was there a catalytic moment? Was there a sign that this was coming? There was the blockade of the road between Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia proper. There was growing pressure on the ethnic Armenian civilians in Nagorno-Karabakh. But when that lightning strike began, were there predicates? Were there signs that the Azerbaijan government was finally going to do something that settled this, in their view, once and for all?
Definitely. For those of us who are here watching and analyzing and keeping a close eye on Azerbaijani officials' statements and actions, we knew this was coming. I'm even going to say I'm surprised it didn't happen sooner. The problem is the world isn't paying enough attention to this region, so it catches others by surprise. It didn't catch me by surprise. It was a bit of a blitzkrieg. I mean, the 24 hours of bombardment, even if one theoretically knows it's coming, when it comes, it does shock you nonetheless, right? So we knew that Azerbaijan was never going to negotiate. They have been aggressive from the outset with both Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. And whatever peace talks they pretend to be having with Armenia, they don't keep their promises and they just come and attack. So, I'm not surprised that they handled it this way, because they abide by the might is right principle. They don't have a peaceful stance on anything because they get away with taking aggressive positions.
In the Azeri view, there wasn't really much to negotiate. Nagorno-Karabakh sits inside the national territory of Azerbaijan, and as far as the government there is concerned, the government in Baku, the writ of their government should extend over the entire territory of their state. This is something that they've maintained even when they were losing on the battlefield, and Armenia seemed to be consolidating its hold on this territory. They maintained that this was part of their national state, and in the chaos that followed the dissolution of the Soviet Union, they felt very hard done by, that they weren't, like other countries in the world, able to control their borders, able to control their country.
Yeah, that's fine, but this is always the problem when the focus is too much on territory. What is the point of having territory if it's devoid of inhabitants? The state is not there to run territory. It's there to govern the people and to create living conditions for its citizens by which they can lead decent lives. And that is supposed to apply to all of their citizens. So in this case, if Azerbaijan was really serious about exercising its sovereignty and territorial integrity over Nagorno-Karabakh, it was required to also take into account the fact that there are indigenous peoples living there who have rights. They hold these rights, and you can't just kick them off their land because you want the land that they're on. I mean, that's not how it's supposed to work. The principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity are sacrosanct in international law, but the right of self-determination and human rights are also all the way up there on the list of priorities when it comes to international law. And for states or state leaders to think that one supersedes the other, this is where we keep running into this problem. Land grabs and wars over where borders should be drawn never take into consideration the massive rights that are being crushed and violated. And if we start taking a human rights-based approach, we might actually stand a chance of living in a decent world.
Well, you're working out of Yerevan. You're very familiar with the scene in Armenia. Was part of this precipitated by the fact that the world was distracted? There are a lot of other things going on, namely in the old Soviet sphere, the invasion of Ukraine and the attempts by the Ukrainians to hold on to their national territory. Is part of this, were the Azeris able to pull this off in part because the world had kind of taken its focus off Armenia?
I mean, I used to say that, but I actually think the world doesn't focus on Armenia ever. So it's always a good time to attack Armenia because the world's not paying attention. Except right now, I've never seen more attention. It always takes this cataclysmic event. I was saying we're waiting for a tipping point, and I think we hit our tipping point. The world watched 100,000 plus refugees, people flee into neighboring Armenia, and it has finally struck a chord. So the war in Ukraine is still going on. Of course, most of the world's attention has been on Ukraine for the last 2+ years, but the Armenians have never been a priority. I think we're a very small country. We're not a very large population. Many people can't put Armenia on a map, let alone Nagorno-Karabakh. I mean, that's even hard. It's hard to pronounce. So I'm glad that finally people are paying attention, but it's for the wrong reasons because this could have been prevented. And it's a little late right now. I also always say better late than never because this conflict isn't over yet. Like Azerbaijan has its sights set on Armenian sovereign territory, and we're all 3 million here. And so this conflict isn't over yet. They've gotten Karabakh back, and now they want southern Armenia.
Is the alignment of the republics in the Caucasus now, for better or worse, becoming clearer? Russia no longer a guarantor of Armenian security. Recently re-elected Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey, the regional power behind Azerbaijan. Armenia may be arguably free to make its own arrangements, but really a small, landlocked prisoner of geography and history.
Well, yeah, that's what's happening. Armenia's been very much let down by its military ally, Russia. Russia has developed, it's safe to say, an alliance with Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan is not a member of the CSTO. So that's a really big problem. That's not a good look for Russia at all. And there are other members of the CSTO who should be concerned with that kind of behavior.
Remind people what the CSTO is.
The CSTO is basically Russian NATO. It's the Collective Security Treaty Organization. It's Russia's alternative to NATO. Azerbaijan is not a member. Of course, Azerbaijan has a strong alliance with Turkey. And Russia's alliances shift. Russia is not a reliable country at all. And so Armenia is really between a rock and a hard place, is very vulnerable at the moment, and is showing its teeth nonetheless by saying we can't rely on Russia anymore. We have to diversify our security architecture. We have to start being able to defend ourselves, and is taking the necessary steps towards that. It's pivoting west, and the West is going to have to really step up and help Armenia. Otherwise, it's very dangerous right now for Armenia, and hopefully the West is going to lend a strong hand. Let's put it that way.
Well, by greenlighting Azerbaijan's capture of Nagorno-Karabakh, even if he'll never admit to it, hasn't Vladimir Putin basically not only realigned the Caucasus, but given a stiff warning to the Armenians that there's only so far that they can deviate? You mentioned pivoting to the West. By this activity, by a member of the CSTO being treated in this way by a neighbor, by a non-member, is Vladimir Putin basically saying to Armenia, watch out, fellas. You may think you're clever trying military maneuvers and training with Western armies and that kind of thing. You can only go so far and not too far.
Yeah, sure. We hear that coming, not only that kind of warnings from Russia, but I think that Russia shouldn't underestimate Armenia either. When you push someone far enough into a corner, they will react. And we don't have a choice. Armenia doesn't have a choice. How can Armenia choose to remain with an ally which has sided with its enemy? It doesn't make sense. There's a limit to this. So I think the step that we took by ratifying the Rome Statute, this was a big deal for Russia because there's a standing arrest warrant against Putin before the ICC. And by joining, it basically means Putin can't come to Armenia anymore or be at risk of being arrested. And it's also just, for sure, Russia doesn't want Armenia to do it and then gets annoyed if Armenia does something it doesn't want to do. Well, too bad. We're going to do what we need to do because this is how we take care of ourselves. This is how we have to take care of ourselves. And this is a really big step. So showing our sovereignty, our strength, and being able to stand up on our own 2 feet is something that every country has a right to do. Every country should do. And it's time. I mean, Russia's not strong right now either. They are suffering enormously in their own war, in their own mess. So what choice does Armenia have but to have to look elsewhere?
I wonder whether there's anything further to say about Nagorno-Karabakh itself. It's practically emptied of Armenians, and it's hard once that happens to litigate that, to say to Armenia, well, they're gone, but they shouldn't be gone. What is there to do? You're a human rights lawyer. What is there to do after the fact?
What's very scary at the moment is there's an enormous amount of significant cultural property and religious property there. So our ancient churches, these go back to the 3rd century, some of them, and they're at very serious risk of being, in fact, like almost certain risk of being destroyed or altered somehow. There is still time to protect those, and that has to happen really soon because that's another layer of irreversible. This is not just for Armenians. This is common heritage of mankind. It's ancient Christian. It's sacred. And Azerbaijan denies that any of this is real or that Armenians were in the region or that this was an Armenian church. So they have been destroying religious and cultural property that they can get their hands on. And there is still that to be done, I think, is to try to protect that property as soon as possible. And now that international organizations have access to the region, they should be really working on making sure that those properties are protected until we can maybe come up to some solution where down the line Armenians can go back. But that's not going to be anytime soon.
Do the people of Nagorno-Karabakh who are now in Armenia, those who owned homes, those who owned land, Are those property rights durable in a way that if you're sitting in Yerevan and you've unloaded your family station wagon and you don't think you're going back to live, can you go back and say, look, I'm gone. My family's now in Armenia, but I want to be compensated for this house. I don't want to give away this land. I want to sell this land. Will your property rights be respected in Azerbaijan?
No, of course not. Of course not. But there's legal recourse that needs to take place. We've seen footage already of homes being destroyed. So the process is underway. But the process would be to file before Azerbaijani courts for compensation. That would most definitely be rejected, or maybe not. I don't know. We'll see. And then normally claims of that nature would go to the European Court of Human Rights.
Well, we've discussed the dislocation and the difficulty, the suffering. What's the best outcome, given the state of play right now, after the military strike, after 100,000 people just picked up and left? What's the best you can hope for at this point?
Just no more war. No more. But it's hard. I don't usually get despondent or fall into despair, but the last 2 weeks have been really hard. So we need to be on our toes here because I'm in Armenia and it's dangerous at the moment. When I hear the kind of rhetoric and the consequences, like we see that members of the international community are also concerned. So they're stepping up their game as well. But hopefully that works. And the best I can hope for is that there won't be any more bombs and any more deaths and any more. Just like, can we sit around the table and have a diplomatic conversation for once that actually leads to a result and not continues to end with more shootings? That's the way it's supposed to be. But realistically, I don't see that happening yet, unless I wake up tomorrow and the world is a different place.
Sheila Paylan, thanks for joining us on Shifting Ground.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to On Shifting Ground, produced in partnership with KQED, with funding from listeners like you. Today's episode was produced by Elise Manukian and Andrew Stelzer. It was fact-checked by Sienna Barnes. It was mixed and mastered by Matteo Schimpf. Additional production and engineering were provided by Rob Spate. KQED's Jim Bennett is our technical supervisor. Jared Sport is our executive producer. Philip Yun is CEO of World Affairs. Our music is from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Ray Suarez. Thanks for listening.